Hello students, welcome. My name is Aaron Mwaituka. I am welcoming you to this program known as Darasa Online. I am a commerce teacher. I am here to revise about the role of government in trade. So this topic, its explanation, the way you can understand it, also you can put it this way, that it is all about the government involvement in business. So in this topic, basically, we are going to see how the government involves or engages itself in business activities. Now, to start with, as you can see, this topic is divided into two parts. There is the first part and the second part. But I will start with the brief introduction. Then I will go to the main parts of this topic. Now, the first part is about the government engages in trade directly. So we are going to see how does it engage in trade directly. Then the second part is about the government control over the private sector. Now, as I've said, we are going to start with the introduction, meaning we are going to define the terminologies which we can see in the definition. Now, the definition, first of all, we have to define what is a government. As we all know, a government is a body of persons. Is a body of persons who rule the country. Body of persons who rule the country. Now, when we say body of persons, we refer to the president, ministers, and civil servants. The president, ministers, and civil servants. So this is what it means by body of persons. Now, these are the ones who control the affairs of a country. Now, another brief introduction is about, now, what does it mean when we say the role of government in trade? When we say the role of government in trade, remember I said it means that all those activities, which the government does in order to make sure that trade operates smoothly. Trade operates smoothly. So this is the definition of the role of government in trade. Now, the next step I'm going to explain is that now we are going to go to the main part of our revision. Number one, as I've said, the government engages in trade directly. Now, in this part, we are going to see how the government engages directly. Before that, it has to, first of all, establish what we call the government bodies. So this is our first part, the government bodies. Now, what are these government bodies? The government bodies are the institutions which are established by the government. These are as follows. We have, number one, we have public corporations. Public corporations. These public corporations are sometimes called public enterprises, or we can call them public companies. So these are business organizations. Public corporations are business organizations which are established by the government, but the government is responsible for the profit and loss of these organizations. Now I'm going to give you some few examples of the public corporations. Number one, we have, example, we have the Tanzania Electric Supply Company. Tanzania Electric Supply Company. This also is one of the government bodies which also engages in trade. But you can see the thing is it supplies electricity in the country, but at a low rate. The rates which are charged are very low. Another example we can give is the Tanzania Railway Corporation. Tanzania Railway Corporation, or in short we can call it TRC. This is also another public corporation. So as well, it operates or it conducts the transport services, but the charges as well are very low. Now another government body which we can mention here is what is called local bodies. Local bodies. Now what are the local bodies? Local bodies, these are the bodies which are established again by the government, but they operate in certain localities. For example, it can be towns or cities. They operate in towns or cities. Let us take an example of Dar es Salaam. In Dar es Salaam. So in Dar es Salaam, we have bus services. Bus services. The bus services are provided by the body which belongs to the government, which is known as DART. DART. This means Dar es Salaam Rapid Transit. So as you can see as well, this body conducts some activities, particularly transport. Another body we can mention here are the so-called parastatals. Parastatals. The parastatals are also government organizations. They are set up by the government, but they perform specific functions. These perform specific functions. So we have some of them I can mention which are performing some specific functions. To start with, we have marketing boards. Marketing boards. The marketing boards, we have various marketing boards here in Tanzania, like the Coffee Marketing Board, Tea Marketing Board, Tobacco Marketing Board. Now their main function, or the specific function, is to market the agricultural products. So they do the marketing of agricultural products. Marketing of agricultural products. So in short, this is what we can explain about the government bodies. Now these government bodies, as we have said, they help the government to engage in trade directly because they are concerned with carrying out some activities which are mainly business activities. Now the second part of our discussion, so this is government ministries which facilitate trade. So ministries, government ministries which facilitate trade. Here in Tanzania, we have two ministries which facilitate trade. The first ministry is called the Ministry of Trade and Industry. So this is one of the ministries which facilitate trade in Tanzania, the Ministry of Trade and Industry. Now what is important with regards to this ministry is to know what are the roles it plays in facilitating trade. So we are going to see some of the roles of this ministry or functions. The first function is to control home trade, and foreign trade. This is the first function of this ministry, control home trade and foreign trade. So when we say home trade, refers to the trade which is conducted within the country. And when we say foreign trade, it means trade among nations. So this is one of the roles. Number two, it controls wholesale trade, to control wholesale trade and retail trade. To control wholesale trade and retail trade. So that is the second function. The third function of the Ministry of Trade and Industry is to give advice to traders. To give advice to traders. So this ministry is responsible to give advice to traders how to go about in conducting their trading activities and to make sure that when they are operating, they also operate legally as per the requirements of the government. Another function is also to promote export trade. So there are various ways which this ministry does in order to promote export trade. One of the ways is by giving subsidies to producers, particularly of cash crops. So when they are given subsidies, it means they are encouraged in their production and they produce at low cost. So after producing, they are able to export to foreign countries. Then another function is to control to control import trade. So this ministry also is responsible for controlling the import trade. So this side is not is something which has to be looked upon by the government, because when the government is importing, it means there is the outflow of cash. The cash goes to other countries, then we get the goods. So this has to be controlled, because in the end it will lead to what we call unfavorable balance of payment if there is too much importation than exportation. So in short, these are the functions of the Ministry of Trade and Industries. So as I've said, we have two ministries here. The second ministry is called the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Finance. This ministry works hand in hand with the Bank of Tanzania. So it works through the Bank of Tanzania. And it performs the following functions. So, functions. Number one, to control money supply. To control money supply. So when there is too much circulation of money in the economy, this ministry is responsible to control or to apply some measures which can control the money supply in the economy. For example, it can limit the credit given to commercial banks and finally to the businessmen. This can be one of the functions. Another function is to regulate business activities through fiscal policies. So this ministry, through the Bank of Tanzania, is able to regulate the business activities through fiscal policies. Now, what are the fiscal policies? These are the policies which are established by the government in order to encourage economic development in the country. Now, some of these policies are taxation and government expenditure. Government expenditures. Now, the way it promotes development in the country through taxation is that the government can reduce tax to producers, those who are producing. Now, when the producers have got this tax reduction, they are encouraged to produce more or to engage in production activities. And remember, when the producers are producing, they will always employ those labor or the labor to work in their industries. So this will lead to the creation of employment. So as I said, through taxation, the government can bring about economic development. By reducing tax, it will encourage the producers to produce, and hence they will employ the labor, and hence employment. Then another thing is through government expenditures. When the government is spending in the economy, We know various ways in which the government spends. One of the ways are construction of schools, construction of hospitals, and construction of roads. Now, when the government spends in these activities, we can see how it can create some employment in these areas. By spending in these areas, when establishing the schools, when establishing hospitals, when establishing roads, some employments are being created. And if people are employed in these areas, it means they will definitely be getting incomes. And after getting incomes, the income will help to raise their standard of living. So this is the second role of the Ministry of Finance. The third role of the Ministry of Finance is that it is responsible for the balance of payments. Now, this concept, balance of payments, it means is the difference between the receipts and payment. Difference between the receipts and payments when the government is engaged in international trade. So as you can see, when you say the receipts are what the country is receiving after exporting. So this definitely comes from exports. And payments will refer to what the government pays after buying goods from abroad. So this comes from imports. So you can see that now if this situation is made well, it means the country is going to gain. Meaning to say, when the receipts are greater than the payments, it means the country is gaining. And that is the good position. So we call it a favorable balance of payment. But when the payments are greater than the receipts, that is not a good position. It means that the government is wasting or is losing a lot of money, is making some more payments rather than increasing the receipts. So when the imports are greater than the exports, we call it unfavorable balance of payment. The fourth function is to give economic advice and forecasting. This is the other function of the Ministry of Finance, to give economic advice and forecasting. So here what it means that during economic problems, there can be some economic problems in the country. So this ministry is responsible to give advice how to solve such problems in the economy. For example, when there is inflation, so the ministry is responsible to give some suggestions of how to go about to treat the problem of inflation. The last function is to control inflation. So the ministry also is responsible, of course, through the help of the Bank of Tanzania. It controls inflation. So there are various ways which the government can control inflation. When there is inflation, meaning there is a continuous rise in general price levels. So either the government can use tax as these tools, taxation, or it can reduce some expenditures. So these are the functions of the Ministry of Finance through the Bank of Tanzania. As we can see that we were in the second part of our revision, the ministries which facilitate trade. Now let's go to the third part. We are going to see now what are the reasons why the government engages itself in business activities. So the third part, reasons for government involvement in business activities. Now let's have a short break. After a short break, we'll come back and then we'll continue with the explanation of this third part. Now the third part in our discussion is with regards to the reasons for government involvement in business. Now we are going to see why the government engages itself in business activities. The first reason is large capital investments. Now here the issue is that if you see there are some investments which require large amount of capital. Now if such investments are left to the private individuals, the private individuals cannot afford. Therefore, that is why the government decides to engage itself in such activities. And on top of that, such activities, their returns are very low. So business or individual persons cannot afford, simply because they invest a lot of capital, but the returns are very low. That is why the government has to come in and do such investments. One of the examples of such investments is the railway network. Establishing a railway network in a country. So this is a very big investment. Another reason is provision of essential services. Provision of essential services. Again here, there are essential services which are such that when they are left again to private individuals to invest in those services, they could not get much profit, because private individuals are for profit. But the government, in most cases, the primary objective is to give service and not profit motive. Now, these investments, particularly the essential services, are of great importance to the individuals in the society, and therefore they have to be provided in most cases free of charge. But however, the government charges some low rates compared to when it could be given to the private individuals. Some of the essential services are water supply, and electricity. Water supply and electricity. Another reason for government involvement in business is to protect the consumers from exploitation. Protect the consumers from exploitation. You know, in the world of business, there are private businessmen. Now, as I've said before, the private businessmen are there to operate their businesses mostly to get more profit. Now, if they were to be given that chance to operate alone in the business environment, they could use that opportunity to exploit the consumers. Now, it is because of this reason that is why the government intervenes and takes control of the business in a country, so as to help the consumers not to be exploited by the private businessmen. Another reason is to create employments. Now here, as I've said before, the government does some expenditures. When the government is expending or spends the money into the economy, like we have said before, construction of roads, there are people who are employed. Or when the schools are established, there are individuals who are employed. Or even the hospitals, there are individuals who are employed. Now, in that way, the government creates the employment. So this is one of the reasons why the government engages in business activities. Another reason is income generation. Income generation. So also, when the government engages in business activities, sometimes it can be with the aim of collecting revenues. Collecting revenues through taxation. So the government imposes tax and hence it collects revenue. Again, this revenue can be used also for some spending of the government. Another reason is risk ventures. Risky ventures. Now, risky ventures are those ventures which they may threaten the security of a nation, such that if they are left on the hands of the private individuals, the security of a nation can be threatened. For example, production of weapons. Weapons, example, guns. Now, this venture is a dangerous venture. If it is left on the private individuals, it means the safety of the nation can be at risk. Therefore, that is why the government may decide to take control of this, not that they should be left on the hands of the individual or private businessmen. So, as we have seen, these are some of the reasons why the government engages in business. Another subtopic we are going to see is called the methods of government involvement in business. Methods. Now let's see which methods the government use to engage in business. The first method is through what we call government investments. Through government investments. Some of the investments I've already mentioned before. For example, such investments are like, example, public corporations. This I've mentioned before. When the government establishes these public corporations, it is one way in which the government is engaging in business activities. Like I mentioned before, like the Tanzania Railway Corporation, Tanzania Electric Supply Company, etc. So this is how it engages in the methods which it uses to involve in business. Another thing is what we call price control advisory committee. So as we all know, price is a major element in business, so it affects a lot of business activities. Now here, through price, the government is able to control a lot of business activities, even those which are conducted by private individuals. Now it establishes a committee. Now what is the role of this committee? The role of this committee is to oversee the whole structure of the price in the country. And also it is responsible to revise the structure of price in the country. When it sees that the price is not appropriate, then it is responsible to revise the price. Also, it can receive applications from a lot of businessmen in the country who want the price to be revised. But again, it is under the Ministry of Finance. It will give all the suggestions to the Ministry of Finance such that the price can be revised. So this is one way in which the government may involve itself in business. Let's go to the third point, is the other method in which the government is involved in business. The other method, or the third one, is called trade policies. Now, trade policies, these are the policies which are established by the government in order to make sure that trading activities are taking place smoothly. some of the trade policies are export promotion, we have import control, we have free trade, etc. These are the policies which can be formulated by the government in order to control trading activities. As we have discussed before, I hope you know what are the impacts of these, particularly these two, export promotion and import control in foreign trade, in order to bring about the favorable balance of payment. Another method is called fiscal policies. Fiscal policies. These are again the policies which are formulated by the government in order to bring about the economic development of a country. These policies are taxation and government expenditures. Taxation and government expenditures. These I have already explained before, how tax can be used to bring about economic development. For example, through reduction of tax, the producers are encouraged to produce, and therefore they create employment. Also, when the government is doing some expenditures, it is one way the government may create the employment opportunities. Then the other method is called consumer protection. Consumer protection. So as you have said, in the business world, the consumers can be exploited. So the government will come in and protect the consumers. So when you say consumer protection, here it means these are the methods, can be the methods which are used by the government to safeguard the interests of the consumers. So here we are going to see the methods which are used by the government to safeguard the interests of the consumers. These methods, we'll discuss them later. So as we have seen so far, these are the methods. We have seen how the government involves itself in business. It is through these methods we can see how the government will involve itself in business. Now let's move on to the fifth part of our revision. Consumer protection. Consumer protection. So as I have said before, consumer protection, here we are discussing about the methods. So it's all about the methods which are used, but here is not only the government, there are various entities we are going to see which use various methods to protect the consumers against exploitation from the traders. So we are going to see various methods. Now these methods can be conducted by the government. So there is the government, there is the government. Now the government employs some laws in order to protect the consumers. There are various laws which are used by the government to protect the consumers. Now let's see what are those laws. The first one is called Public Health Act. Public Health Act. So this is one among the laws which protects the consumers. This is established with the aim of making sure that the lives of the consumers are protected. Lives of the consumers are protected. Consumers live a hygienic life. So consumers should be protected so as they can live longer, and they have their life should be the one with the hygiene, full of hygiene, not to be affected with regards to their health. So this is one of the laws. So as I have said, it is established by the government. Let's see other laws. Let's see other laws which are established by the government to protect the consumers. The other law is called Sales of Goods Act. Sales of Goods Act. This also ensures that the traders are not exploiting the consumers. So traders are given some proceedings to make sure that they are not exploiting the consumers. So to ensure that traders are not exploiting consumers. Traders are not exploiting consumers. Then another act is called Weights and Measures. Weights and Measures Act. Weights and Measures Act refers to those instruments to ensure that the instruments which are used to weigh and measure the goods are according to the standards. Another act is called Food and Drugs Act. Food and Drugs Act. This also ensures that the foods which the consumers are consuming is not harmful. Then the other law is called Rent Control Act. This ensures that the landlords are not exploiting the tenants. Ensures that landlords are not exploiting tenants. So these are some of the methods which are used by the government to protect the consumers. Now, another thing we are going to discuss with regards to consumer protection is the need for consumer protection. Need for consumer protection. But before we proceed, I'm going to give you a question for revision so that you will do. When we come back, we'll proceed with the discussion or explanation of the need for consumer protection. Now the question, I'm going to give the question. So this is the question. Bakari is a layman who doesn't know that the government engages in trade. Is an expert explain to him why should the government engage in trade. So this is the question. Then later we will come back for lesson 2. So this is the first part of our lesson. Then later we'll come back for lesson 2. Thank you very much.